the Battlefield franchise is home to loads of different weapons from many different eras. From the bolt-action rifles of the Great War, to the rapid-firing machine guns of present day. One thing the Battlefield games are well known for having is a massive variety of guns to pick from, with your primary weapon being the most important part of your loadout, because that's the thing that you'll be using most of the time as you play. With so many choices on offer, it can sometimes be a bit hard to differentiate a lot of those weapons, with a fair few of them having similar properties, fitting into the same playstyles, and kinda looking like the rest of the pack too. But out of the hundreds of guns available to use over the years, there's definitely a few wackier ones that have been chucked into the mix, that look, function, and perform differently to the others, being much more unique and unusual. And it's these funkier outlier weapons that we're going to be taking a look at in this video. Here's my top 10 list of strangest primary weapons in the Battlefield games. Kicking off the list at number 10, we've got ourselves the PP2000, that's popped up in quite a lot of the Battlefield titles. Now this thing might function in a pretty normal way, but you'd be hard pressed to find many other Battlefield guns that look like the PP2000, with it easily having one of the weirdest gun designs in the game set in modern times. It looks a bit like some sort of funky futuristic machine pistol that would be designed by an art student, while he's getting high in his flat. One that's got a weird passion for angles and science fiction films. It wasn't designed by an art student, however. It's in fact a Russian weapon, made by the KBP Instrument Design Bureau, and it was intended to be used by riot police and spec op forces, rather than a secret agent from Total Recall. Compared to your average machine pistol type gun, it does look pretty mad, and it gets even stranger looking when you start to slap on attachments, with flashlights and suppressors. They kinda look out of place on a weapon that's so small and compact. But one of the most interesting features of the PP2000, which isn't actually in the Battlefield games, is the fact that you can actually shove a spare 44 round magazine into the back of the gun, where it'll protrude outwards and act as a stock, giving that magazine dual purposes. Quite a handy little feature. It's not the most outlandish weapon in the franchise, but nevertheless, the PP2000 is still quite literally a very edgy gun, that surely deserves a place on the list. In 9th place on the list, we've got a prototype gun all the way back from the year of 1915, the HELLRIEGEL from Battlefield 1. A lot of you guys are probably expecting this meme to pop up somewhere on the list, being one of the more popular guns in the series, whilst at the same time being one of the rarest in real life. What makes this thing so different to the other weapons is the fact that it's a water-cooled SMG, not the kind of words typically used together in a sentence, pretty much being one of a kind. Water cooling technology was an old-fashioned way to lower a gun's barrel temperature down so that it didn't overheat, and was typically used on really old heavy machine guns, so they could keep the bullets whizzing by. This meant that said weapons had to have a big ass shroud wrapping around their barrels, making them heavier and less manoeuvrable than normal. It would therefore seem like a bit of a daft idea to put one of those water cooling shrouds on a lightweight SMG, but it happened, when some Austro-Hungarian guy designed the HELLRIEGEL, and also decided it would be a good idea to make it compatible with 60 and 120 round drums, which also would have contributed to the weapon's weight. This pretty much makes the HELLRIEGEL the fat guy of the submachine guns, but to be fair, the SMG concept still hadn't been fully envisioned in 1915, because no proper ones really existed at this point. You gotta remember that the HELLRIEGEL was just a prototype, and barely any information on it, apart from a few old photographs, exists today. But it still winded up being in Battlefield 1, and then went on to wind up people who play Battlefield 1, down to it being a bit of a newbie thing to use. In our 8th spot on the list is a gun that's literally just called the 1887. This mysterious all-kit weapon is actually the American Winchester Model 1887, aka a really bloody old lever-action gun. Something quite unique to the Battlefield franchise. Lever-action weapons are very few and far between, but what makes this one even more interesting is the fact that it happens to be a shotgun too, allowing you to fire out one nasty blast at a time while dishing out some brutal damage up close. The problem is, because the 1887 is a lever-action shotgun, that also means that it's got a pretty slow fire rate, because you'll have to operate that lever in between trigger pulls. so missing too many shots in CQC will often result in you taking a few unwanted bullets. One cool little feature that makes the gun even more interesting is the fact that it has a secret firing animation that plays when you equip both the short barrel and sawed-off stock, letting you spin the gun around after every shot, making you feel a bit like the Terminator. The fact that a weapon made in the 1800s appears in a game set in present day is a little bit strange, even more so when you consider the fact that this weapon was originally made for lawmen and cowboys in the Wild West. And with you pretty much being surrounded by fully automatic machine guns and military hardware in Battlefield Hardline, the model 1887 does seem a teeny bit out of place at times, one of the more eccentric choices you can choose. So coming in at 7th place is Battlefield 1's FEDOROV-DEGTYAREV, another really weird Russian gun that was developed quite a long time ago. The Medic class's more popular Fedorov Automat is already a bit of an obscure weapon as it is. A lot of people have argued about its categorization for many years, and whether or not it was the first assault rifle ever to be made. The Automat definitely looked and functioned a bit like an assault rifle, but because it was such an early design, it was often considered to be more of a relative, acting like an ancestor rather than the real deal. However you want to classify it, the Automat was still a bit of an odd looking thing as it was, but it got even stranger as development went on, because not long after the First World War, the gun's designer decided to pimp the rifle up by adding a Lewis gun style barrel jacket and bipod, experimenting with the weapon to make it a bit more like an LMG. This is where the Fedorov-DEGTYAREV comes into the scene, essentially being one of those post-war experiments, looking pretty similar to the Automat rifle, but even wackier and more out of the ordinary, like a mashup of a battle rifle and a light machine gun. How the hell did this thing end up in Battlefield 1? Haven't got a bloody clue. It was a weapon that was developed during the interwar years, but you can somehow equip it on your World War I loadout. It's easily one of the strangest weapons in the Battlefield series, and rightfully deserves a place on the list. Next up, we've got yet another weapon from Russia, but this one's from Battlefield 4. A really odd looking automatic carbine called the Groza 1. Now this gun looks like something that would comfortably fit right into the Fallout or Metro games. The Groza, also known as the Thunderstorm, is a bullpup weapon that was made in the early 90s, and based on the AKS-74U, a carbine version of the AK-47. You can kinda see a resemblance to that weapon, and internally it's practically the same thing. But obviously you can also see that it's changed a hell of a lot too. Still looking like a typical Russian gun, but only much more high tech. The Groza 1 specifically is a special short-barreled carbine variant, with a few integrated attachments incorporated into its design. This variant of the gun's got its very own compensator and vertical foregrip, but there's also another variant called the Groza 4, with a built-in suppressor. Both looking pretty similar, but performing in different ways in the game. It was a gun that was originally created for close quarter combat use, with quite a lot of its variants, including the ones we get to use in Battlefield, made to perform better within shorter sightlines. But because of its modular design, the Groza is compatible with loads of different attachments, even ones that can transform it into a sniper rifle. It's not the strangest gun in the Battlefield games, but it's definitely a contender, looking pretty bizarre whilst also being very unique in the way it compares to other Russian weapons. Halfway down the list at number 5 is Battlefield 1's BURTON LMR, a rapid-firing rifle that's got a big pair of metal rabbit ears. The BURTON light machine rifle has two individual magazines that stick out of its head, forming a bit of a V-shape, which kinda looks like you're aiming down a canyon in ADS. Both of these magazines, however, hold different ammo types, with the one on the right containing 20 rounds of standard ammunition, but the one on the left 20 incendiary rounds instead. You have to manually switch between the two ammo types on the fly, as they're both going to work independently from one another. And you have to keep in mind that they're both going to perform in different ways depending on what you happen to be shooting at. Those normal bullets are going to do what normal bullets do, put lots of holes into infantry players and send them back to the spawn screen quite effectively. But the incendiary bullets on the other hand aren't going to be quite as deadly when they're fired at soldiers, as they're designed to be used against planes and airships instead, just like they were in real life, for setting observation balloons ablaze during the Great War. The Burton LMR was made obsolete before it really had a chance to see action, with Vickers machine guns utilising incendiary ammo and being fitted to planes, which would have been much more functional than the rifle. But nevertheless, this pretty unique gun still appears in Battlefield 1 anyway, letting us play around with some distinctive weapon mechanics, thus bringing something a bit different to the game at the same time too. Next up, we've got one of the most ridiculous looking weapons in the series, the M3 infrared semi-automatic rifle from Battlefield 5. You can probably see why I've put this on here. The weapon itself isn't really all that out of the ordinary, basically being a converted M1A1 carbine, but the attachments that come with it make the M3 look completely different to everything else, like something that's been put together in an old optician's. What you've essentially got strapped to the top of your M3 is an infrared spotlight and scope designed to be used for nighttime operations. Pretty advanced technology for the 1940s, but it definitely looks a bit weird compared to the kind of stuff we see today. And the fact that such a bulky device was mounted on top of a rifle, which would have been quite heavy, making the weapon a lot harder to carry and use, does make it look and seem a bit daft, especially with it taking up such a huge chunk of the screen in the game. Considering you've essentially got some night vision optics on your gun, they can often do more harm than good, with them often seeming a bit crap in most Battlefield gunfights. But the infrared tech isn't the only thing that makes the M3 stand out from the crowd, because it's also got its own bipod and suppressor attachments too, making it even quirkier and different to a lot of the other weapons. The M3 carbine is basically the freaky version of the M1A1, having the same sort of stats, but looking like it's gone a bit mad in the accessory department. Definitely one for the list. In third place, we've got ourselves the RSC SMG from Battlefield 1. Easily one of the wackiest submachine guns you'll ever see in a game. Now if you thought the RSC 1917 rifle was a bit of a weird gun, this thing takes it to a whole other level, pretty much being the SMG version of that weapon. It features a lot of the same mechanisms and was designed by the same guys, but obviously it functions as a completely different weapon, originally intended to be used by tank crews for close range combat. But with the RSC SMG utilising a lot of the same systems as the rifle, this also meant that it was chambered to fire that very same rifle cartridge too, a cartridge that would have been really bloody powerful for a submachine gun, a little bit too powerful for its intended purpose. To make this gun even stranger, instead of using magazines, like most normal SMGs, this one was designed to be compatible with 8-round clips, pretty much giving the weapon the complete opposite set of characteristics to a typical submachine gun, which usually has weaker bullets, but more of them to expend. You have to do a bit of a finicky dance to swap those clips around, giving the RSC SMG some pretty long reloads, and considering you've only got such a limited amount of ammo at your disposal, this will often make you really vulnerable in close quarters, where the weapon is designed to excel. The RSC SMG functions in a bizarre way, and looks like something that's been thrown together in some sort of steampunk workshop. There's no other submachine gun quite like it, so it rightfully deserves a spot here, in the video. Now the next weapon in the list is a very different kind of gun, because this one doesn't shoot bullets. In Battlefield Hardline, there's the option to equip a special all-kit primary weapon called the A8S. No, it's not the Samsung Galaxy A8S, it's actually an American pneumatic airgun that launches arrows, a little bit like a crossbow, only this one can do it with a lot more force, being powered by CO2. It's generally a weapon designed for hunting, grapple launching and stuff like that, or in Battlefield's case, turning people into shish kebabs. Launching arrows at other players is going to impale them and pretty much kill them in one shot a lot of the time, with the weapon dealing such a high amount of damage per hit. The A8S's arrows don't fly as fast as bullets however, and at the end of the day it is a single shot weapon, so you're going to have to reload after every pull of the trigger, with those reloads taking quite a while to perform. Not great if you happen to be in a position where you're surrounded, or if you need to take on more than one player at a time, giving it very different characteristics to most of the other guns in the series. And because it doesn't fire bullets, it acts like a suppressed weapon, not giving away a position on the minimap. There's a lot of power and there's a lot of risk that comes with equipping what is essentially a beastie harpoon gun. having some of the most interesting, strangest weapon mechanics in the franchise, while looking like a bit of a monster at the same time too. So in my number one spot on the list, is unsurprisingly another weapon from Battlefield 1. Because let's face it, Battlefield 1 had a lot of really bloody weird guns. The SMG 0818 is probably the strangest of the bunch though. Not just because it looks like a bunch of random bits of metal and wood slapped together, but because it's also extremely mysterious, with barely any information on it being available. Nobody really knows very much about how it functioned, and nobody really knows about its origins, hence why DICE decided to play around with its fire rate, being dramatically changed over the course of the game's life cycle, but we still don't really know what that fire rate actually was. It's all just guesswork. The weapon itself was obviously some kind of experimental submachine gun, and its mechanism seemed to be based on the MG 0818 from what we can gather. But unlike your typical SMG, this one actually used a very different and very unique multi-column M-block clip, holding up to 80 rounds in rows and columns. These massive clips would be slotted into the big box on the left side of the receiver, ready to be used by the gun, only for the empty clip to be yeeted out of the right side of the box when all of those bullets have been spent. Even for a gun designed in the early 1900s, it's a pretty bizarre concept. I guess you can only expect these kind of wacky ideas to come into place when you've got nothing else to base them on, being completely original and unlike anything we've ever really seen before, or will probably ever see again. Was this thing ever used? Was it ever fielded? How many of them existed? We'll probably never know for sure. But the fact that a weapon so obscure appeals in a Battlefield game makes it one of the strangest guns of the lot. But anyway, that's my list, but what do you guys think of the strangest primary weapons in the Battlefield games? Let me know your choices down below in the comments. Subscribe and apply all notifications to see new content first, and give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.